So good afternoon, everybody. And I apologize for getting this up on Tuesday instead of Monday, just the way this week worked out. Let's take a minute first to talk about sort of housekeeping issues and some just references to where we're headed and how we'll proceed. Thanks to those of you who came to the meeting last week in Teams. I think it was a productive meeting. We had, I think, a pretty good discussion, and especially lively discussion of the Hemingway short story, The Short Happy Life of Francis Macomber. We will have a few more Teams meetings over the course of this semester. It works easily. I think it was easy for everybody to sign on. I hope that you'll begin to feel more comfortable asking questions or typing questions into the text box and engaging with each other, sharing ideas and comments and questions. That's what those sessions are for, so that you all can see each other and see me, and we can talk face-to-face about the readings and and the concepts that we're exploring about gender and the literature that we're reading. So hope to do more of that. Speaking of logistics, next week we are scheduled to meet face-to-face again on campus to discuss the upcoming test. Your test on the first 3 chapters in the Laughlin textbook will be next Friday, the 25th, and that will be in e-learning. So we are scheduled then to get together again to discuss the chapters that you've read in the format of the test. We can do that on campus, face-to-face. I can split you into 2 groups, and we can meet on Monday and Wednesday during class time, or we can meet again in Teams. To find out what you think about that and to just kind of poll the class, I am going to put the question in the discussion area in the first forum where you wrote your introductory post. I am now going to put a query about which you would prefer to do. If you would, over the next few days, please answer my query about whether you would rather meet on campus next week or meet again in Teams. The meeting is optional. At any rate, you don't have to attend. It's really for review for the test. So please answer that query on the discussion board to let me know what I should do and what I should schedule. Okay, so on to this week then. You're finishing Chapter 3. Chapter 3 had so many texts in it that I thought it was worthwhile to split it up, make life a little easier for you. So last week you read about, in the first half of the chapter, Elaine Showalter's description of women's writing in kind of 3 phases, and she describes each of those phases. And then you read the 2 short stories, The Revoltive Mother and Miss Grief, where you saw women in a 19th century setting kind of pushing up against the boundaries that had been established for them, one as a writer and one as a rural farm wife. And so those were examples of that stage of writing, the feminist stage of writing. This week you are reading in the rest of the chapter specifically about the way women began to write. And again, these are 19th century and early 20th century writers. Kate Chopin wrote into the early 20th century, and so did Susan Glaspell was writing in the 20s and 30s. And so we've moved kind of into the 20th century, still sort of in that feminist period of writing where women are examining their role, examining the sort of boundaries that have been set for them, what a society would allow them to do and would not permit. And in these cases, these 2 women are examining desire. So Kate Chopin first, you have a couple of brief sketches. She wrote a novel that was very controversial called The Awakening, and it was about really a woman awakening to her desire, not just her sexual desire, but her desire for more freedom, her desire to transcend this kind of conventional marriage that she felt she was kind of trapped in. And so it was a very sort of controversial novel for the time. But she also wrote a series of these short kind of sketches, mostly set in Louisiana, where she lived for a long time. And so you have 2 of them, A Respectable Woman and The Falling in Love of Fedora. And they specifically engage with women kind of coping with sexual desire, physical desire, and attraction to a man, and sort of the description of that and how they then responded to an understanding that they suddenly were drawn to these men. And so you have those two kind of brief stories, and I've given you a link to a site that will tell you more about Chopin, her life, and her writings, and sort of typical themes in her writings. And then you have a longer story written by Susan Glaspell called A Jury of Her Peers. Glaspell was a journalist, and she based this short story on an actual case that she covered as a journalist. And she later converted the short story into a play that is much better known called Trifles. Fascinating play, one-act play that still gets put on quite often in community theaters and in repertory theaters around the country. It's very popular. Also ends in quite a controversial way, and so I'm interested to see what you make of it, what you think about the ending, and how you think about the decision that the two women decide to make. It's a really fun and interesting story to read, and I'm curious about how you guys respond and what you think. And I also have given you a link to a site on Glaspell so you can read a little bit more about her and her life and the kinds of things she did and what she wrote and the sort of themes that she covered. I think what you'll see in this short story is Glaspell very clearly describing the way that men viewed women at the time, particularly in rural areas. This is a case or a story set in the Midwest, in the farm areas of Midwest, and it really, it's kind of a depiction not only of the boundaries that were placed on women and how much power husbands had to control their wives' activities, but also what happened in the Midwest in the winter. These farms were very isolated places in the winter. They would become snowed in, and people would not be able to get out and kind of, interact with others for months sometimes in the Midwest. And so they were very constricted, very constrained, and literally during this period, you've heard the phrase "stir crazy," and the phrase stir crazy really goes back to these periods of time in the Midwest and up in the Northeast, extreme Northeast, where in these rural areas people would be confined to their homes for long periods of time, and literally some did go crazy and did do sort of crazy kinds of things because they were driven a little bit mad by their confinement and by the lack of sunlight as well, as people have since discovered. So that sort of plays into the story as well. But the story hinges on the way that the women see what happened to Minnie, what she did and why she did it, and the way the men see it. The kind of details that the women notice that the men overlook, and why they overlook them, what their biases are and their prejudices are that cause them to be blind and to literally just not see what happened, and the reason that the women see very clearly what happened and understand it so much better than the men, and the decision that they make at the end. So I hope you enjoy the story. Do again let me know on the discussion board what you would prefer about next week. I've put up study questions for all three of the stories. Again, we're using those in lieu of a reading quiz. And you have a discussion board post. And this week you have a couple of different options for the discussion board. Get in touch with me via email if you have questions or concerns or problems this week. And otherwise, we'll talk next week.